My name is Mike Roy. I work as a city manager, and I'm going to introduce the public hearing tonight because this is something, the study of the intersection, the Spring Street, Water Street, Main Street intersection is something the city's been working on for a long time. And it started really as a result of our sale, the city's sale of the Hathaway building to this gentleman and some of his investors. Yeah, it's you. You can run when you can't hide. And so in the sale of the Hathaway building, we made a commitment in writing that we would investigate the intersection for any and all improvements that could be made for pedestrian crossings. Because I'm sure all of you are familiar with the intersection know it can be pretty tough trying to get through there if you're a pedestrian. So our commitment when we sold the building was to look at any options we could, and we looked at the over the intersection approach, the under approach. Those are really pretty much out of the question, but I think there are other improvements, changes that could be made that would allow for a safer passage for pedestrians. So we applied to the state for a grant, and so some of the money that we are using to hire Tom Gorel and his associates at Gorel Palmer Consulting Engineers comes from the state planning grant. The other money to pay for this is coming from the city's, actually the Hathaway TIF money that was set up a number of years ago. And we're on pretty much a fast track, so I think that by mid-January we'll be at another one of these meetings and able to talk about some specific changes that could be made to the intersection. How those changes will be paid for, of course, is another question. But at least we'll have some options identified and costs associated with those options so people know that if we want to change things, well, just what will it cost.
Okay.
And unless there are any questions, I'm going to introduce Tom Gorel. And tonight's session really is to get feedback from you folks about the computer display that they're going to put up that's going to show the intersection and vehicles moving through. And so we want to hear from you tonight. So whether you think the depiction of that traffic pattern, those traffic patterns, is consistent with what you know, or if it's not consistent, let us know. And Tom will do a better job of explaining that than I just have, but essentially that's the purpose for tonight's meeting, is to show you what the intersection looks like based on a few days worth of collecting traffic data that you folks did down in the intersection last month.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Mike, and hello, everybody. I am Tom Gorel with Gorel Palmer Consulting Engineers, who is, we were selected by the city to complete this study, and we're very pleased to be able to work with you, and we thank you all for coming out tonight. I know you got a lot going on, so we're trying to be very respectful of your time. So the hope certainly is that we're not here more than an hour and a half anyway, but we really do want your input and comments. So again, I appreciate you taking the time to do that. We do have kind of a partner, as Mike said, in this process, the Maine Department of Transportation. They don't happen to be here tonight, but we're working with them on this study as well. With me tonight also is Don Ettinger over there in the orange sweatshirt there, or jersey I should say, and Randy Dunton. And you won't hear too much from Don tonight. You'll hear more about, or from him, when we get into the actual alternatives, but we're not there yet. And you're going to hear a lot from Randy tonight because he is going to run the video and talk to you about that. So, and Mike is right that the goals for tonight, we would like to run the existing condition model by you. That's basically an animated model that shows the existing traffic flow that's out there. We have not done any alternatives at this point. We have not taken them. You had that first study that identified some, but we haven't dealt with them yet. We are also, so we want to get your comments on the model, whether it looks about right for existing conditions. We also want to listen to you tonight in terms of any issues you have with the intersection. We've reviewed the past studies, but we'd certainly like to hear any issues that you have and things, and even ideas or whatever that I guess you might have. In terms of the future steps for this process, just so you understand where we're going from here, as Mike said, this is a very fast-track project, very fast-track. So we're pretty much going to be done with it by the end of the year. And our hope is to have another public meeting where we'd show you the options, and that's likely, we wanted to kind of avoid the December, because everybody gets pretty busy in December. So we'll kind of have it done, but we're going to hopefully have a meeting somewhere, perhaps first or second week of January, I think is what we've talked about, hopefully. So that there's not going to be much time between this meeting and next. So hopefully you can all come back and you'll see the similar model, but it's going to present the alternatives we developed, and it's going to have those modeled, and there'll be some cost estimates, and you'll hear a lot from Dawn at that next public meeting. So that's kind of where we are and where we're going. And as I said, you know, I don't anticipate more than an hour and a half tonight. Maybe we'll be done more quickly. Who knows? Depends on how fast Randy talks.
Any questions? No.
Let me interrupt you for 1 minute,
Yeah,
because I
absolutely.
forgot to mention something.
Yeah.
A lot of people have quizzed me in the last 3 days about, is what's going to be depicted tonight about two-way traffic on Main Street. And nothing shown tonight, or nothing to do with this study, is looking at two-way traffic on Main Street, period. The only thing that they're going to do for us is, should two-way traffic be considered for Main Street later, how would it affect the intersection itself, the signals,
Precisely. Yep.
and that kind of thing. But in terms of looking up Main Street and what would two-way traffic look like, this study has nothing to do with that. I forgot to mention that. Sorry, Randy.
No, thanks, Mom. As Tom said, my name is Randy Dutton, Goro Palmer, and just a brief description of what you're going to see and why you're going to see it and why we're showing it to you is you're going to see a model, a traffic model. It's called sim traffic. And what we do is we go out, we count the actual traffic that's out on the road. We sit there for hours with little boards and count traffic. We count the truck percentages and all of that. We also got the timing and the phasing of the signals. We use aerial photography, which you'll see, in order to make sure that we have the lane uses correct and the lane lengths. So everything that you're going to see is about as close to representing what's out there as we can get. The reason we're showing it to you tonight is it's called a calibration stage. And what we're looking for you folks for is you drive it every day. Nobody knows it better than you folks. So we want to show it to you, and we're looking for feedback from you as to, yeah, does it look about right? You know, is it representative? And we'll calibrate it, again, based on what we hear tonight, and that way we'll know that we have a model that's pretty representative of what's going on. So when we go to do alternatives, we have confidence in the alternatives, and you folks will have confidence in the alternatives, that may be what it looks like in the future if we were to do A, B, or C. So that's the purpose of tonight. It's really your meeting. I'm just going to show it to you, and we're going to ask for comments as to, you know, like I said, what does it look like? What you're going to see is a typical AM peak hour. You're going to see a typical PM peak hour, and you're going to see a typical Saturday afternoon hour. So with that, unless there's any questions starting off, super. Give me a minute to bring it up here.
The other thing is, there is a sign-up sheet going around, so if everybody could sign in, that would be great. That's just something that we like to include as documentation in our report, that, you know, we have public participation and who was here, so if you don't mind signing that, that would be great.
And again, I'll kind of describe what you're seeing. Can everybody see that okay? And excuse me if I turn my back to you occasionally. Well, try and get out of the way here. You'll see, first of all, the aerial. This is an actual aerial off I think it's Bing Maps. And these are the lane uses as approximately as you see them out there today. You know, ones like this are not exactly, but it simulates, you know, what's out there. You'll see that the cars are colored in different colors. There's yellow, blue, white, and all that's telling you is that what that car is going to do at the following intersection. So the next intersection it comes to, it tells you what color it's, the color tells you what it's going to be doing at the next intersection. For instance, these are blue. That means they're going to be taking a left. The whites are going through, and the yellows are taking a right, but you're going to see these as yellow because the model considers this to be through. So this is actually a right, so that's why. Let me speed it up a little bit for you. What you're seeing at this point is an AM peak hour, and what you were watching was kind of slow. It was the normal speed at which things occur. This is a little bit faster, just to give you more of the hour, so you can see more of the hour. And you'll see that it doesn't operate real poorly. It actually operates fairly well. You can see that there's a lot of volume, you know, coming up this way, coming from Winslow up this direction up Front Street. You can see that these left turns are relatively busy. You'll see in the PM peak hour that gets a lot busier. Again, what you're seeing here are actually what a car would see as they're driving. The green obviously is a green light, yellow is yellow, and red is red. So see these turn green, and those cars went. Then that one I believe will turn yellow possibly. But that's the actual timing and phasing of the traffic signal to what's out there. So any questions with the AM? Any comments? Yeah, that looks about right. No, it's way out to lunch, and this is why.
Randy, you might want to point out that you just lost a truck going through there, but what a truck looks like.
Yes, absolutely. These are typical cars, and you will see larger vehicles. And I'll point one out when I see one right there. That's a truck. Actually, that looks like a bus. And these are actual what was counted, and so the percentage of trucks is proportional to what was counted, the percentage of cars. Everything is, again, as close as we could get to, you know, what's actually out there.
What we're looking at now is not actual speed.
It's not actual speed.
Is this faster?
This is faster. I sped it up
They actually go.
so that you could, yes, I sped it up so you could see more of the hour. Otherwise, if it was at regular speed, we'd have to be here for an hour just to see the AM. This is actually at 4 times the normal speed.
We're our something on that. So if you think about Main Street is coming
Quick
down.
question for you on the model there. Maybe it's just a function of the model, but coming off Water Street,
Yep.
that right-hand lane, that's actually a straight lane. That turns, but then the one up next
Yes.
to the Green Island?
Yep. Yep. That's a straight right there.
Okay.
And that's the way it's modeled. It looks like it has a right arrow, but that's because it considers this being the straight movement. You have to kind of play with it a little bit to get it to work when you have a one-way separated from you know, it's not used to that. So this actually, the model knows that they're all going this way, but it calls it a right.
Gotcha.
And this is a hard right, if you will. So, but excellent question.
But the model doesn't show coming around Main Street to Front Street. You couldn't factor that in?
This here?
Right. And there's a fair amount that uses it.
Well, we could do that, we certainly could. The volume ranged from about 12 vehicles in the AM to about, I think, 30 on a PM peak hour. It doesn't affect the traffic signal. What it does do is, you'll notice in the PM condition, is that when the Q is back, basically the stacked vehicles, when the Q gets back to here, obviously those vehicles can't get to that movement. We certainly could add that, but it wouldn't add, you know, it wouldn't affect the intersection a whole lot. Comments? You folks drive it every day? How's it look? Does it look pretty decent, or?
I don't see any pedestrians.
We did count pedestrians, good question. We did count pedestrians. They are not shown, but the timing of the signal, you have, what's out there is a concurrent pedestrian phasing, which means, for instance, these people would cross when this street goes. These people would cross when this street goes. And the timing is such that they have the appropriate time in which to cross. So even though the pedestrians aren't shown, the timing of the signal is such that it accommodates the crossing pedestrians. If this were an exclusive pedestrian phase, which means the pedestrian pushes a button and everybody stops, then you would see something a lot different than what you're seeing.
Maybe a little picky, but when you're explaining the general concurrent crossings, you pick two directions that don't currently have crossings.
Yeah. Good point. Thanks, Greg. Yes, ma'am.
I think it's important to consider the pedestrian. I lived at Waterville Way for quite a long time until recently, and that two-phase process that you're talking about is not really effective for the pedestrian. And it depends a lot on the traffic and who's going to obey it, because you may get halfway out and the light turns, and where are you? You're stranded. So I think that's really important to consider if we really want people to walk down.
Absolutely, and if it wasn't mentioned previously, part of, or the main part of this project is to make it more pedestrian friendly. So that's the goal, is to make it so pedestrians can cross safer, easier, and with less effort. So that's an excellent comment. Thank you. Is there anyone else? Would you like me to put up the PM?
Before you do, Randy, it certainly looks from what we've seen so far that the busiest leg is the Water Street turning right to the bridge. Is that true?
Actually, the busiest movement is turning up to Front Street and turning off Main Street. And there's a truck right there.
Mm-hmm.
So bridge to front.
I'm sorry.
Bridge to front, correct.
Bridge to front.
Yep. That volume right there is the heaviest.
I'm new in town, so
You were just seeing if I was paying attention, I know. And again, I will speed it up a little bit, because it's kind of slow and boring at normal speed. Let me move this a little bit closer to the center here.
You just zoomed out and you showed there are other intersections. So right now we're focused on this intersection.
Correct.
But I wanted to make sure that folks in the room understood.
Absolutely.
If you could zoom out just for a minute. In order to look at this intersection, you actually have to look at the traffic coming from the next two intersections. So they've actually included Bay Street in Winslow and Silver Street in Waterville as the adjacent intersections, but this model does more than just this intersection.
Absolutely.
And I think the focus is on the pedestrian improvements at this intersection, so.
How backed up it
Yeah,
is.
on Main
Yes.
I
Street.
mean, Main Street is.
Yep, this is a good point to show that, you know, how backed up this is, and that they don't actually all make it through during their green time, if you will. There are some that, you know, will have to make it, it'll take 2 lights for them to make it through. Now, this is the PM condition, approximately 4:15 to 5:15. Again, the timing, just so you know, the timing, the phasing is the same, but the timing is different. You have different timing plans for the AM, the PM, and the Saturday. They actually,
On the traffic lights, you mean?
on the traffic lights, correct. Yep. And all that is representative. When we went to the PM, the phasing, which vehicles go when, is the same, but how long they have for green time changes from time periods. You can see that there's definitely a lot more activity going on. Still heavy movements from the bridge onto front. And if you, I apologize, I should have said this before, but orientation is obviously the Spring Street, Water Street, Main Street, Front Street. This is going over to Winslow, Bridge Street.
Randy, you said that some folks are, that some cars are not making it through the light on the first try, but that's not what this model is representing. I'm not seeing anybody stop.
Not every time.
Not any time, it seems like. Is there any time?
You will see a time, for instance, maybe now, maybe this is the
Okay.
perfect time.
Okay.
But they don't always all make it through. There are some time period, this is perfect. Perfect time, right on cue.
At 5 o'clock. 5:03. 5:03.
You will see that the vehicles back here will not make it through. Well, now they're gonna make me a liar. There we go.
Okay, so.
Does it show cars trying to race the yellow light?
No.
Well,
But, I don't wanna go into, to bore you with too many details, but every car has an individual driver that has different characteristics. And it's random, it's not, you
but
know.
they all obey the law.
They all obey the law. Absolutely. First question people usually ask me, can you make them crash? No, I can't make them crash. So again, this is a heavy volume. This is a heavy volume. These volumes are picking up, but they seem to make it through during the green light. Does this look fairly representative of the PM? Yes, sir.
Comment, does that reflect the mass influx of cars coming out of Hathaway now that there's so much, in general, parking there as far as the hospital folks? That entire parking lot is full, and I'm wondering, when do they leave?
The modeling actually is since the Hathaway change has been made. So since, this modeling was done after the Hathaway employees arrived.
Right.
Okay. This is
So they're here, so they're already here in this.
And to answer your question a little more detailed, if vehicles, within that peak hour, if vehicles all arrived in a 15-minute period, say, and none in the other, 45 minutes,
Right.
it would factor that in. It would factor that in, so.
And I don't think they're a typical 9 to 5 business either. I think their hours are much earlier than what, I could be wrong, but it seems like they.
Yep, we counted from, I want to say 3:30 to 6. So this is the peak hour within that time period. Yes, sir.
I don't see many cars going from Main onto Spring, and those that do appear to stop at that section.
This here?
Yeah, they stop at that line there, and
Yep,
that's not a stop sign.
That's a yield. That's a good question. This represents a yield sign,
Well, that guy's gonna stop.
and
No,
He
he's
slows
not.
down.
Nobody's coming, he's just gonna go.
they
That was me,
do
by the
slow
way.
down, as if, it would be typical behavior. They slow down, look to see if there's anything coming. and then go. And again, some of the drivers will take right off, and some of the drivers will stop for a car that's way back here. Because every driver is different, and every driver in this model has different characteristics. Yes, sir?
What is this animation telling us that we don't already know?
Very good question.
Thank you.
What this animation is for, what this modeling is for, it's a base on which to build or make decisions, because what we want to do is make sure that this model represents what you see out there today. So then when we make a change, we have confidence that what it's going to show us if we make that change is representative. For instance, if you were to take away this slip ramp and bring all the traffic up to here to make, at the signal, to make a right, you obviously can't do that. You know, it would cost a lot of money to make those sort of changes. So what you can do is you can do it in a couple hours with this program, see how it affects it, and know whether or not you're going to create problems, whether or not it's going to work okay. But this is the first step. We want to make sure that this is the existing conditions and that this looks representative of what's out there today. And that way we have confidence moving forward when we make a change that what it's showing us is representative.
Well, I just feel that the emphasis is in the wrong place. You've spoken really only about moving cars around, but I feel this meeting should be about people. Getting people from the south end up to Main Street and vice versa. But this is all about cars.
Yep, and that's a good point. Again, what we're trying to do here is to show you what's happening. The whole idea of this project is to make it more pedestrian friendly. So we may take, in order to make it more pedestrian friendly, we may reduce this down to 1 lane or 2 lanes instead of 3. We may take out this slip ramp, that slip ramp, and that slip ramp to make it more pedestrian friendly, to make the distances that people have to cross shorter, make the number of crossings less. So that's why we're doing this, so that when we make a change to accommodate pedestrians, we know that we're not going to completely screw up the intersections in the process. So you're absolutely right. It's about people. It's about making it more pedestrian friendly. But this is just the first step. The next step, again, we're going to try and make this intersection smaller. We're going to try and make it more pedestrian friendly. But we can't screw it up in the process. So,
well, and the other important thing too is that if we're going to obtain any state or federal funding to make changes, this study is absolutely essential. We wouldn't be able to go forward without having something like this to show.
I'm sure we need the study, Mike.
Yeah.
Well, the alternative, I mean, we're going to look at a lot of alternatives once that we have the base established, which is what we want to do to look at tonight. But we're going to look at all alternatives that, you know, a range of alternatives from some of the ones that Randy talked about in terms of lanes to things like roundabouts and that sort of thing. All of which is to try to address pedestrians. We have pedestrian counts at all those intersections, but that's really not the story because obviously you probably have more pedestrians if you had a more conducive pedestrian crossing. So we're going to absolutely look at that. That's, as Randy said, a real focus of this study.
So you're looking into the possibility of having fewer lanes so that the pedestrians don't have to cross such a far distance.
exactly. Exactly. But again, we can only do that down to a point where we start to affect, because if you are looking for money, which you are, and you're looking for a partner in that money, such as a DOT, they're not going to allow you to reduce the level of service that you already have at the intersection. from a capacity standpoint. So we're gonna reduce it, rearrange it as best we can, to still accommodate traffic, but make it more pedestrian friendly.
Is any part of this study canvassing the pedestrians directly? I mean, how much public, I mean, obviously, we're all here because we're part of the public, but not all of us are a pedestrian on a daily basis going through this area. The folks that would be using it, how are they being involved in this? What kind of information are you getting from them?
Well, we did count the pedestrians to see what, what the.
Not in numbers, but just in actual.
Right.
their physical.
That's what you folks are for. That's what we're here tonight to hear. And that's what we're hoping is we're not getting just drivers, but we're getting pedestrians, people that walk through this area. We want all the input we can get from everybody.
Now?
So go.
Is it time to talk about that now?
You have something to say.
Is there any way to slow this down a little bit?
Absolutely.
It just seems like it gives you illusion, it's a lot busier than what it is, and I'm not a very smart man, so I need to see things that, it's just for a short time, that way they're just, right now, it just kind of gives us the illusion it's going much fast, and,
Oh, that's, there you go. There you go.
thank you.
They're not represented.
Where are the bikers?
They're not reflected on this, that's not what this is.
Were there any factors factored in for, I wasn't sure, I didn't hear about pathways for people with special needs, access and stuff like that?
That's one of the things that would come as we look at alternatives. Everything would have to be ADA accessible, ramps, countdown heads, crosswalks. Everything would have to be, up to par, if you will. Meet all the latest
But that hasn't
requirements.
taken effect, you haven't taken that into consideration yet?
Nope. We didn't come tonight with any preconceived ideas or notions because we want to hear your input before we start on any alternatives. We want to hear what your issues are, walking, bicycling, driving, and then we're going to take your feedback, and that's what we're going to use to, to factor into the alternatives when we do them.
We're also going to look like 20 years into the future as well.
That's a good point.
As best we can to forecast traffic for things like the Hathaway Creative Center, but we're not going to be doing that just in terms of one mode. We're going to be looking obviously where it is. It's a great opportunity for foot traffic. So when we make those sorts of forecasts, we need to forecast what we're going to have for foot traffic and make sure that we can actually get them across this intersection in terms of the lane use timing and all that sort of thing, and to accommodate all those things you're talking about. So that's part of what we'll do between now and the next time we see you is do that forecast. The city staff has helped us with that forecast already in terms of the not the traffic or the modes, but the actual land use. And so that'll be outcoming from that, and we'll be able to get an idea of the number of pedestrians we need to plan for.
Yes, Chris.
I'm not very familiar with pedestrian projections. We haven't done this that much in Waterville. I'm quite familiar with the traffic projections. You have so many square feet, you have so many cars. So
Right.
is there a trend in America that's being discussed right now about more people walking in metropolitan areas or micropolitan areas? And is that going to be part of the pedestrian forecasting?
It is, and it's not a science as much as the traffic forecast is, but there's a recognition certainly within the planning and traffic engineering community that there are more pedestrians, particularly in a downtown area than there used to be. So we absolutely try to take, educated guess, I guess is the best way.
When you make
Like
the
complete
guesses, are you
streets?
That sort of thing, exactly.
When you make those projections, are you going to have a projection or are you going to have a range of projections?
Well, yes, we will end up with a range of projections. Right now, we're kind of looking at a high and medium and low, so you have an idea. It's almost like a sensitivity analysis, in terms of, the sort of the capacity for that pedestrian movement. And Jennifer brings up a good point. One of the things we haven't really thrown out tonight is, but we're talking all around it, is what's called the Complete Streets Initiative. And, you know, you wouldn't have been talking about that probably just 5 to 10 years ago even, but now the DOT and consultants like us in communities, it's really come from the communities, want alternatives that are developed to be complete, what's called complete streets. So that's to take consideration not just for the automobile, which is what we've always done in the past. It's to consider the other modes, and those are primarily pedestrians and bicyclists that have sort of been ignored in the past. And so now what we're trying to do is, when we come up with alternatives, is to make it something that will serve all those modes. So,
Well, I will tell you, just for concrete input, the reason why I'm asking the questions is I do live in the south end. I do drive plenty, but I do walk plenty too. If I'm within a mile of this intersection, so I want to go for Loyal Biscuit and buy food for the dog or whatever happens to be, I do go up through there, and that intersection is formidable to the pedestrian. I mean, it really is. It's convoluted.
Yep.
There's a lot of stops and starts, and you know, when you get into heavy weather, for example, stuff like that, it's even worse. So it's definitely something that needs to have some kind of flow adjustment to it to get people across there. As it stands right now, it's a bit of a great divide. You know, people go other routes to get straight into the heart of downtown. So, you know, something that can make it more efficient is definitely something that we need. So.
Yes, ma'am.
I think that this issue for the pedestrian is larger than just this intersection. I know when I did live at the Pathway, it took me 7 minutes to get out the door and up to the children's bookstore. And people would say, "You walked?" And I felt like, what is wrong with me? I'm some anomaly that's this person that walks. And I don't mind having that label actually, but I think if we're going to promote downtown as a friendly downtown and a place where you can walk and you can be safe, which is also an issue as far as I'm concerned, we have to consider that if people are going to come from all directions, it's a behavior thing. And I mentioned this to Mike the other night. If I'm now walking down from Elm Street, and I wait, I try to obey the law, I press the button and wait for the little voice to tell me that I can walk, and occasionally those don't work, so you have to sort of take your chances in playing traffic to get across the street. And if they are working, you set out, you're halfway in the middle of the street, and the oncoming traffic, who should be waiting for me, the pedestrian, are nudging me, just nudging me. I have the right of way, I think I'm the pedestrian. And so we're not going to, I don't know how that's going to be solved, but it's scary at times, it's frightening. And we should, you know, my city should keep me safe and all the other people who walk.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
To me, it's obvious, everything is pretty much in favor of the motorist, not the pedestrian. I think we really need to slow down the traffic on Main Street. I mean, it's terrible. It's bad enough getting across that intersection, but even Main Street is very difficult because the cars don't slow down. The best way to slow them down, the least expensive way, is to start at Elm Street, going down Main Street with graduated speed bumps. Speed bumps, motorists hate them. But why do they hate them? Because they have to slow down. If people go up to Colby College, you'll see a whole bunch of new graduated speed bumps. I say graduated because they're not bone jarring when you go over them, but you do have to slow down. With a whole series on Main Street, motorists would have to slow down. And they would not be expensive to install. And you could say, oh, well, the emergency response vehicles won't like them. Well, that's true, because it might take 20 seconds longer to get down the length of Main Street. But again, Colby College has already done the research. They have them all over the place there. We should be looking at that. We need to slow down the traffic before it gets to that intersection. When people want to cross, there should be large countdown timers so people know where they are before they start trying to cross the intersection. And they should be able to hit a button, and that should turn the lights red. Because we're talking about people as well as automobiles. So if cars have to slow down, good, they should. Let them wait, they'll be able to get through. But pedestrians come first.
Thank you. Very good comments.
We, just to respond, Stu, our Main Street organization is going to help us purchase one of those speed limit signs. So I think, right, Jen?
Yes.
We hope to, in the next month or two.
Actually, we chose one.
Sign, what is that?
It's a mobile sign that will tell you your speed as you approach it. You're now traveling at 43 miles an hour in a 25-mile-an-hour zone. So that's been shown, I think, to slow people down. The other important thing that I think they've already been installed, Jen, is a 2 large pedestrian.
Flashing beacons.
Like flashing beacons, yeah.
Right.
Right by Sailor
What are
T.
they called?
Flashing beacons.
Flashing beacons. So there's one at the Sailor T corner,
Yeah.
and the other one is Temple Street.
This has not been installed. The other set has not been installed. I want it to go on Temple in front. That's my wish.
But the one
Okay.
on Appleton, I just can say, I was down there this week, and cars speeding by as always, and I pushed the button, that light flashed, and I felt like, you know what? I'm gonna make it across the street without getting killed. That's awesome. And it worked. They slowed right down.
Okay, I haven't seen
Yeah,
it
it
in
worked great.
operation. I wondered.
It was perfect.
So the light is working.
The light was perfect. Yep.
On their side.
Yes.
No, it's
One of the problems that we're dealing with here is we're trying to get the car traffic and the pedestrian traffic on the same plane. And that's tough to do, but that's the way we've been thinking in this state for a long, long time. Now, putting the pedestrian traffic below this traffic has never been considered to be a desirable thing to do. But the reverse, if you pull those intersections in those roads and you bridge it over, actually drop, you're gonna dig the whole intersection up, you're gonna rebuild it. Might as well lower the whole intersection and bring the pedestrian right over the top, as wide and as you can. It can be a park, but you'd have uninterrupted passage from Water Street to Main Street to Front Street. The issues at this intersection disappear. Think about that.
I mean, just uninformed, wouldn't that be awfully cost prohibitive to take on an engineering project like that?
It's gonna be a lot less expensive to build the pedestrian overpasses because you don't have to take care of a 100,000-pound truck. They're not gonna be massive structures, but they'll be structures, but they won't be massive. And if you're gonna dig it all up anyway, why not go overhead? Yeah, it's gonna cost some money, but it's gonna be there for 50 or 100 years. A lot of things we really value cost money. People always thought, well, it don't cost too much money, but 50 years later, it's still an icon and wherever it was built.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
To add to that, if you have the pedestrian, it might be like a bubble because you can't go completely deep enough, but it would be all grass for the park. So you're coming up from the Hathaway, you're coming uphill, people are tired, you have older people coming back and forth. That would be a place for them to stop, rest. There would be maybe a flagpole with seats, you know, concrete seats or whatever. A resting spot coming and going from either direction.
It's just money, but it solves the problem 100%.
Thank you, both. Yes, sir.
You folks must be compiling costs with all this infrastructure. As far as looking at the different scenarios, what he's talking about with the bridges and just changing patterns and the slip routes, tightening them or eliminating them completely. The infrastructure cost to all this.
Actually, that's what Don over there that I introduced, Don Ettinger from our office, will actually be doing that.
So you don't have some low ball figures or high ball figures yet, you're still compiling all this data.
That's right.
Correct.
So the thing about it is that we are in a cash-strapped city here.
Yep.
And the thing about it is that when you look at this, this could turn into like the big dig in Boston. I mean, it's if you're going to put all this money into this one intersection, what's to say that we don't have other intersections in the city that are problems?
One of the things the council is going to recommend very strongly is that we follow this study up with a study of the entire traffic picture downtown. That needs to be done. And this is just the first step. The next step will be a traffic study of all of the traffic in downtown.
I'm just saying we gotta be careful about what the costs are.
Well, there are other intersections, you're right about that.
Yeah, there are.
Spring Street is, the West Spring Street goes into Elm Street is bad, where the library is bad, up by the new police station is bad, there's all kinds of problems.
But the reason we're starting here, though, is because the city of Waterville made a deal, an agreement with Hathaway.
Oh, I can understand that to a
Center.
certain.
So it's like, this is what we promised we would do if the development happened, and it happened. So that's why it's starting here.
I think to your point a little bit is that you'll see a variety of alternatives, and what we'll do is present you like a matrix or a table that's going to show different intensity, if you will, of improvements. Basically the cost and the benefit of those. Now, you've got to take both into account, the cost and the benefit, but you'll see those choices, and then that's where you folks help make those choices. So there's a range of alternatives that you see, and you may not pick the most expensive. It could be the best, but you may decide you can't quite afford that, and so you kind of look down, and there may be one that's close to that, or a little less on safety, but a lot less on cost. Those are value judgments that the community can help us make. What we're doing right now is to identify those and to give you the information you're talking about. Is what their effectiveness would be and how much they'd cost.
I also think you have to take into effect too with the Main Street traffic coming down. We already have a problem on Main Street with merchants getting their supplies and shipments. I mean, you got trucks parked out in the road, and now you're going to make this more pedestrian friendly. I mean, this is going to be a quagmire for that potential as well. And the merchants are going to be harmed by this to a certain extent if we're going to slow everything down and make it pedestrian friendly for these trucks to get in and out of their standstill spots.
To get pedestrians to the stores so they can purchase items too.
Right,
I mean,
but I'm just saying this is going to be still, it's going to slow this whole process down from traffic flow from Main Street.
There are projects that have been done, especially in England, where the solution to their problem was to slow the traffic down. Get rid of the lights, just slow the traffic down, and it worked. A lot more throughput. Instead of people sitting at the light racing their engine, they were all moving very slowly through the intersection. So it doesn't necessarily mean you got to speed it up.
When we think about cities, bigger cities, and how they deal with the shared space of their downtowns, I mean, you just use like New York City as the biggest, weirdest example, is they have certain rules around when trucks load and unload. Like we as a community could make a decision like that, like, okay, everything has to happen before 7 a.m. or not during peak times, or if you're going to, or not on Main Street, or sometimes there are ways that you can you can work within,
You can to a certain extent if the merchants are going to buy into that, or they're just going to pack up and leave. And this is some of the things that we have to consider. We have to be addressing our merchants too, as far as the study is concerned, because we're already getting some bad report from merchants already, and we don't want to do anything to damage it. Well, holy cannoli was one thing last night. I mean, that's not has anything to do with the traffic flow, but we also have to be considerate of what's going on, with this as well, to be more inclusive.
I think we also need to be careful. The committee was also discussing this intersection really isolates our south end pedestrians from downtown. And so, children, pedestrians, bicyclists, and people who want to walk into downtown, whether it's to the concourse shopping or to the downtown. So making this pedestrian friendly is also going to open up that area, we hope, and to really bridge that divide between the south end, downtown, and the rest of Waterville. So I think we also need to be careful that there's a whole neighborhood down here who really, instead of walking this way, they're walking up the other areas. So they're not even hitting any of the areas in downtown. So I think we just need to be careful and not forget about the South End community.
Could I speak?
He's been waiting patiently.
Think it, we're now talking about downtown planning, which I had a lot of experience in as a consultant, most of it back before 1970. However, some of the basic principles were not followed when this downtown plan was developed back in the 60s, because it put assigned large amounts of through traffic, not really interested in stopping in the downtown, right down Main Street. The more typical planning concept would be to have one-way traffic on the outsides for the through traffic to use, and two-way traffic on Main Street, and keep it real slow because you want to emphasize safety for pedestrians between the stores that are on both sides of your main street. If we could change and make the Spring Street connection be the preferred route for through traffic, it would make this pedestrian crossing, I think, somewhat easier.
Thank you.
Spring Street how, Ellen?
To attempt to bridge the gap between the South End and Waterville proper, I think we should be looking at low-tech solutions first. I love the idea of a park in the sky where residents can go up to this park and rest and then cross over. It's not going to happen.
It's not that high, I'm not talking about a high park. It's just a rounded over.
Well, if it's over the road, it's pretty high. There are so many things we can do to make things easier for pedestrians. One is to plow the sidewalks. Right now, the city, I believe, is not required to plow the sidewalks on Main Street. We expect the shop owners to do that, and often they don't. So who wants to walk downtown in the winter? I mean, I think we should ask the city to do the sidewalks, and then we know that they get done, and we could get from one end of Main Street to the other. This is not a high-tech solution, but it's going to help people who want to walk from Main Street across to the South End, and that's where we should be looking at low-tech solutions first.
Yes, sir.
Just as I've been watching this, what it seems to me as a possibility to reduce the amount of time it takes pedestrians to cross from the South End up into the downtown would be if they only had to cross 2 lanes of traffic instead of 3. And there's probably a couple of ways to achieve that, and you're looking at the traffic to see what's feasible.
Yep.
One way, in my opinion, could be to ask them to walk along Spring Street a short ways and cross, where it's already just 2 lanes in each direction, and then give them a very nice way to go up through that parking area behind the stores and come to the downtown that way. I have some concerns about doing it that way, but I'm just trying to share my observation from looking at what you're showing me.
Excellent. And that's a good segue kind of back to this. This was the PM. Does this look, again, I want to make sure when I leave here tonight that, yes, I've heard comments that it looks representative, or no, it doesn't, and this is why. Does this look pretty representative of what's going on out there during the PM peak hour?
The speed of the cars coming onto Front Street off the bridge, they do not slow down. We've got them slowing down in that curve, they don't. They actually accelerate as they're going through it because they see no one going through the intersection.
Yep.
And it's clear. They're hitting 40 when they come out of that turn.
Okay. Good comment.
Oh, it's bad.
Is your model capable of reflecting where the actual crossings are right now?
Where the pedestrian crossings are?
Yes, where they are currently?
It's reflected in the timing of the signals, because again, this is concurrent phasing, they walk with the, with specific movements of traffic. So that's all in, yes, to make a long story short, yes, that's included.
But you don't even show one person trying to cross the street. What, this doesn't make sense to me.
We can revise that and put that in there.
But why revise it? Shouldn't that be part of the whole story?
That's kind of what we've been trying to say, is that they're not shown, you don't see them, but the timing and phasing of the traffic signal reflects the pedestrian crossing times. So that if you're a pedestrian out there, the time that the traffic goes, you go. This isn't an exclusive pedestrian phase where you push a button and everything stops. This is concurrent. So the timing of the traffic signals, which this represents the appropriate time for a pedestrian to cross from one side to the other. For instance, some of the, I'll call it green time, that the traffic gets could possibly be shorter if it was not for a pedestrian crossing. So again, this represents the timing required for pedestrians to cross as they would today, as they would out there today.
I really think it's a terrible computer program if it just shows motor vehicles and not people. It's got to show people crossing the street. To show just cars, it doesn't tell me anything.
Okay, fair enough, thank you. We'll add the pedestrians so that you can see them in the future models, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
You said you counted how many people were crossing?
Yes.
What did you get for the count?
I do not have that in front of me. If my briefcase is around here, I can look that out. But we'll find that and I will let you know.
I don't remember it being that many.
It wasn't that high.
It was actually,
I'm sorry, what was the question?
What was the actual crossing volume of pedestrians?
But I don't think it's accurate anyway, because people are afraid of the intersection, so they're driving back and forth.
And that could very well be.
So,
That could.
you're not counting the people that are driving.
Well, even when we were out there, like, as a committee, like, looking at it, we saw people crossing in places that they shouldn't really be crossing because they were trying to make a shortcut, because they were crossing like in the slip lane, and they really, it's dangerous, and so.
Yep.
I don't even think the study would have shown a real pedestrian
Right.
following the right.
And as Tom said, it's very possible that if you improve it, you will increase pedestrian crossings. And the alternatives will have pedestrian crossings that, whether there's 5 or whether there's 50, it's going to accommodate pedestrians the way that it should. Whether it be timing, whether it be ramps at the proper locations, pedestrian ramps, whether it be crosswalks, again, it's very well possible that pedestrian activity, and we expect that it will increase, especially with the development down here. As that occurs, you're going to get more pedestrians crossing. So it's imperative to make sure that they can be accommodated, that they can be accommodated safely.
Randy, is it possible to put on there where the sidewalks are and the actual crosswalks as they exist right now? Because there's some places in that intersection, significant places, where there's no sidewalks at all.
The alternatives will show exactly that.
Okay.
It'll show where you may have gaps in sidewalks,
Right.
where you maybe don't have a crosswalk now where perhaps you should, where there are no ramps now, but there's proposed to be ramps, so it will show all of that. Yep. Yes, sir.
I see some city councilors here, and I'd also like to address this to Mike Crowe. Cost absolutely does matter, and I ask the city not to put all their eggs in this one basket.
Mm-hmm.
We've got other areas of the city that also could use attention, Kennedy Memorial Drive, for example. That is also difficult to cross. So just keep that in mind as well, moving forward. And we also have businesses on that end of the town. I'm all for supporting Main Street. However, we can't forget the rest of the city in the process, nor can we expect them to foot the bill and get nothing in return. So just please be cognizant of that fact. And keep in mind too that we are living in a time of revenue sharing cuts, and I don't anticipate that to improve anytime soon.
We are fortunate in terms of what we could have for money for the intersection, Gary, in that there are two TIF reserve accounts set up right now. One is associated with the Hathaway development, and the other TIF is the downtown TIF district. So money from those two TIFs go into reserve funds each year to be used for projects, all different types of projects. So in terms of using property tax dollars for track improvements, you're exactly right. They're very, very scarce, and is this in fact the most important intersection to spend property tax dollars on? M Plaza, you could make a very good case for the M Plaza intersection. But again, in this case, we're fortunate in that we have those reserve funds from the Hathaway and downtown TIFs that we can't use just in our property tax. That's one benefit we got.
I'm curious, and maybe it's you or maybe the engineers, what are other sources of external funding? Have you searched for state, federal, any other kind of funding?
Yeah, that's part of what this study is in fact being done in part. I mean, there's several reasons for the study, but one of the things that this study does is to enable the documentation that's needed for applications for federal funding, federal and state funding.
There are a lot of them.
Right.
And they're very, very competitive.
So they require documentation, and that's what this is for, and that's also why we're bringing and keeping DOT involved in the process. That's why you are all here, because it's important to that process that we have public input and that we listen to it, and that it gets reflected in the plans. So, but that's something that I think would be a component as they move forward, is some level of cost sharing with the state and feds.
One of the things that Waterville Main Street is able to do from time to time, because we are a 501c3 organization not affiliated with the government, is we can leverage private philanthropy on some of these projects. So there are incentives around public health improvements that we can get some funding in that way. And so we were successful in a couple of areas, smaller grants that are strictly grants to fund some of this work.
Excellent.
Waterville could be competitive in some of those grants.
And what we found out last year when we looked into the grant sources, especially the federal grant sources, we realized that a project that we would submit would actually compete with DOT projects statewide. So it's like, how in the world are we going to compete with a DOT project in Saco or Sanford or whatever? But it doesn't mean we shouldn't try. But that one particular funding source, I forget the name of it.
Tiger program.
Yeah, well, it was called the Tiger funding, is also open to the State Department of Transportation, which has huge local resources.
Could this be linked though with DOT?
That's the point.
Certainly tried.
That's the, this builds the
Be a joint
case.
application.
Yeah, this builds the case for state and federal.
I think it was at the committee, didn't we have a list of things that were on the verge of happening in this area? And that, I mean, obviously we have a commitment to the Hathaway Creative Center, but we're on the verge of some pretty major things in downtown and the Hathaway, and so this being a really good first step for the city, but I completely agree that this isn't the only one.
This isn't the only one.
The city has definite traffic, intersection, pedestrian issues, especially like Upper Main Street, where you can't even cross the street from the hotel to the restaurant to eat, which is, a huge problem. So, but I mean, isn't that why we're looking at this?
Right. Well, I mean, there are the confluence of a number of different things that could be happening.
It's symbolic, really. I mean, I'm just thinking about this. Downtown is important to every town. I've been in Waterville now for about 4 years, and I noticed that in the downtown area suffers a little bit from the misconnection it has, and some of the misconceptions people have about how the businesses work there and how you get to them. So starting here makes sense symbolically for the town, and that's really where we go. I agree we can't put all the eggs in one basket, but to me, this is an issue that can draw a little more attention to the town in general if it's cleaned up correctly. So I think it's important.
So are these streets, or this area, are these city streets, or is this state, or is this federal? Who
Well,
owns this?
of course, Federal Highway 201 goes right through the intersection. Actually comes across the bridge from Winslow. 201 goes up Front Street. And then, of course, when 201 comes south, that's our main street.
So how much control do you have over that?
I'm sorry?
So how much control do you have over that?
Not a lot, no. I mean, anything we do to a federal highway has to have state and federal approval, so we're quite limited.
All of the streets that you see in this model are state aid highways.
No local roads. Right. So, yeah, we can't do much without, of course, getting the assent from the state and or feds.
So would they do the work? The city would hire people to do the work?
You're ahead a little bit.
Okay.
When we come up with a list of alternates and prices, now we petition for funds to get something done.
Right.
Now they may come up with the best alternate, but we may settle for the second best alternate because the funding's available.
Right.
And I'm ahead of the process, but that's what I see as something that may come from this planning process. It may not be a solution that's the most expensive when we dig our heels in.
But if
We
there's
dig our
any,
heels in for 20 years and get nothing, we've accomplished nothing.
but if there's any construction work, it probably would be managed by the city, of course, with state and federal review,
It
right?
could be a city-state agreement or completely state.
Or
But in
completely.
this case, depends on the order of magnitude, I think.
Yeah, okay, right.
Mike,
we really-
can the TIF funds be used for financing bonds?
I'm sorry, Al?
The TIF funds, can they be used for financing bonds?
Yes, the TIF funds run out, though, after a certain period of time, so
Right.
the bond may go longer.
Yeah.
But you could use your TIF money to pay off a bond for a specific improvement in the district. Yep.
Yeah, municipal bonds are going for under 3% right now, the best that I've ever seen in my lifetime.
Right,
And that'll buy a lot of money.
right. And construction prices are still pretty reasonable, right? Pretty.
What I switched to while we were talking is what you're looking at now is a Saturday peak hour. And just to let you know, when you compare the AM, the AM and PM peak hours during a week and a Saturday during the week, the PM peak hour is the highest. You have the highest volume going through this intersection during the PM. So we already looked at the highest demand, and that was the PM. This is a Saturday. It is distributed a little bit better among the different approaches, but your overall volume going through the intersection is higher in the PM peak hour. And again, we want to leave here tonight with feedback as to whether or not this looks representative, so that when we make these changes, we've heard some great considerations to take in moving forward with the alternatives. But in order to do that, we want to make sure that everybody's comfortable with, what you're seeing, so that when we do show the alternatives, you're comfortable with that as well. So, yes.
Can you say something about the seasonality of roads in Maine and how that might affect this?
Absolutely.
Summer people versus,
That's a great question. As I think somebody mentioned, the counts were done last month. October. And we use adjustment factors to bring those up to what's called the 30th highest hour, basically the 6th highest week of the year. So we adjusted those volumes up to basically summer conditions. Where you have high commuter routes, such as this, you're not going to see a whole lot of fluctuation. It's not like if you're familiar with like Route 302 or Route 1. You're not going to see huge differentials between the summer traffic and it's night and day. This is a little more consistent. The seasonal fluctuation was only like 7%, where Route 1 it could be 30%, 40% differential. So that's a good question. So the volumes that you're seeing are a peak hour during the peak months of the year. You know, if this was dead of winter, it would be expected to be a little bit less than this, but not a whole lot. But one thing to kind of a curiosity sort of thing when we were coming up with these volumes is we had volumes that the DOT had collected in 2013 for this intersection. They had not collected traffic on either side. We collected traffic 2014, same month of the year, on either side, and we looked at the volume headed into this intersection and the volume that they counted going into the intersection. They were very close. So from year to year, from 2013 to 2014, there was very little difference actually in traffic.
Which helps our case.
Absolutely, absolutely. Did I answer your question?
Greg got a question over
Just
there.
another question and a general observation. I've seen these a bunch of times, and it appears that most of the traffic at this intersection is Winslow related. So people are coming from Winslow to go somewhere, and most of them are taking a right and going on the front street. Or they're going straight through and then going somewhere on Spring Street, or they're going to Winslow. The bridge is the biggest feature
Yes.
of this intersection.
Your highest volumes are that movement right there, coming off the bridge onto front and going from Main onto bridge. Those are your highest volumes, almost fairly consistently.
So that's nothing like it was when I first moved to Waterville in the early 80s, when the mill was still open. At 5 o'clock, you couldn't get across the bridge. You couldn't get to downtown. You avoided that like the plague. It's better than it was in the 80s, but there's still a lot of traffic to use that bridge versus other routes. Do we know why, or is there anything that in the study that would address that? And I think the answer is no. But I think out loud sometimes, so forgive me. But I see that bridge as the feature that drives how we manage this intersection. And,
Correct.
you know, Winslow pays tax dollars to the feds and the states. It's not just a Waterville issue. This is a regional issue. That whatever we do here will also affect Winslow. We haven't really looked at the Winslow side of the bridge, but this model does account for that.
It does.
Whatever we do here has to keep the Winslow intersection operable.
Correct.
We didn't talk about that at all, but the MDOT is going to talk about that later.
Correct. And just to add to that, I don't want to get too technical here, but all three of those intersections are interconnected. They're operating on the same cycle length. You're right, one does affect the other.
How about accident data?
Good question. This intersection is not a high crash location as defined by the Department of Transportation, which means a high crash location, it has to fit 2 criteria. The first is that it has 8 or more crashes in a 3-year period, and it has what's called a critical rate factor of 1 or greater. The critical rate factor compares similar intersections throughout the whole state. So you would expect similar intersections with similar volumes to have kind of the same rate, if you will, of accidents. This intersection did meet the criteria for number of accidents. I believe there was 16 in a 3-year period. That was 2011, 2012, and 2013. 2014 data isn't released yet. But the critical rate factor was right around 0.8. 0.8, 0.83, something of that magnitude. So it's not classified as a high crash location, but 16 is 16 more crashes than you would like to see. The crashes were almost all rear-end crashes coming in this direction and rear-end crashes coming in this direction. I can't remember the exact number, but they were by far the lion's share of that 16 crashes. We will take a look at that. We created what's called a collision diagram. We read all the police reports, create a diagram that shows all the crashes, and try to look for contributing factors that are consistent through at least 3, if not more, accidents. So we will be looking at that as well, because sometimes the timing or the phasing of an intersection can be a contributing factor. If there's not enough yellow time, if there's not enough red time. So we're going to be looking at that. So I'm glad you brought that up, Mike. So again, there was 16 crashes. Almost all were either rear end this way or rear end this way. So comments. We've gotten some real good comments and
No
concerns.
pedestrian accidents, they were all vehicular?
I don't believe there were
I don't
actually any.
believe there were any pedestrian accidents, but that's absolutely something that we focus right in on. If there is a pedestrian, we want to know what time of day, where were they crossing, what were the weather conditions, all of that we will know when we look into it further, when we start looking at alternatives. That definitely, bicycles, pedestrians, how did it happen, when did it happen? We read the police report, see what the police had to say about it. So that's very critical for us. Yes?
Hey, my name's Fran Bond. I'm the Director of Healthy Northern Kennebec, which is a public health program in the greater Waterville area. And I just wanted to put in another voice for walking and biking. I used to live on Elm and Spring Street on the corner up there. And not necessarily speaking for myself, but more the folks in the south end and the folks at Hathaway, and just making sure people can get back across that intersection. And walking and biking are going to be, the next 20 years, it's going to be more and more
absolutely.
and more. So I think that we just need to, like, whatever you're looking at, to make sure there's safe sidewalks, to make sure there's safe paths for kids on bikes, moms with strollers, people with wheelchairs.
Yep. There was something in the news this morning that said the 2-car family is going to go from about 53% to about 47%, with more people, using other modes of transportation.
Right. People in their 20s are using fewer cars, driving less.
Absolutely.
We're going to see that next 20 years.
Yep. Thank you.
Something that we just haven't pointed out, that the misuse of land really too in this intersection. I mean, if you ever go out there, you see there's these huge patches of grassy areas that nobody in their right mind is going to use at all, because it's a horrible place to be, because it's basically for cars. And the larger one isn't even accessible really.
Just crosswalks don't work.
There's no crosswalks. It's dangerous. It's a bad place to be. So in this, we could actually gain land too.
Absolutely.
If we look at it correctly, land for people to walk their dog, or I don't know, like to make it more pedestrian, not just friendly, but look better when you're coming in from Waterville or from Winslow. This is your first view of Waterville, and it's not a friendly, nice. It's for cars. It's not for people.
Right.
So unless you're putting maybe a sign, there's absolutely no use of this piece of property down here.
Right. Absolutely. And that's apparent as soon as you go out there. You see kind of a large vacant space that's not used for anything.
It says welcome to Waterville.
There you go.
So we promised that we would hold this meeting to, no more than an hour and a half or so, and we're getting right up to that, and we want to be very respectful of everybody's time. And certainly appreciate everybody's coming out. If someone has something to add that, maybe we haven't heard before or whatever, and if not, and it comes to mind, certainly we're pretty reachable. City staff knows how to get a hold of us. Just to refresh your memory of what we said earlier, our next step, which is going to be soon, will be in January, where we're going to have these alternatives for you, and everything that you've been talking about tonight, I hope that you will come to the next meeting, because that's really where you see how your issues that you've expressed here tonight, the range of options that can be employed to address some of those. So Dawn will be presenting those at the next meeting. Again, it's coming right up in early January, so hope that you all will take the time as you did tonight to come to that. And that will be really our last meeting for this process. So if there's any other questions? If not, I certainly wish you happy holidays, and we'll see you early next year.
Thank you for all your comments.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.